La Rochelle is the midpoint of France's western coast, and is known as the White City for the light reflecting from its limestone buildings, and the story of an Irish army captain who established it in the mid-1700s. Its old harbour is guarded by two towers that also dominate here. St. Nicolas stands on the east side and the imposing Tour de la Chaîne on the west, the latter named as it housed the huge protective chain that was drawn across the water at night during the Middle Ages. His father was a wine merchant in that town, but when Bouguereau was still a small boy, the family moved to Saint-Martin-de-Ré. He was born on November 30th, 1825, and from his youth his textbooks were filled from cover to cover with drawings of scenery, sailors, and peasants, all of which were viewed with admiring eyes by his companions. At length his father consented to allow him to enter the École des Beaux-Arts of Bordeaux, with the express condition that he was not to become a painter, for that was a trade which did not pay. However, after 2 years at the École des Beaux-Arts, he won the first prize for painting the figure. This was in spite of the fact that his competitors were all-day students, while he was only in the studio for 2 hours each morning. The success so intoxicated him that he straightway informed his father that the career of being a merchant of oil gave no chance of a life for him, and begged permission to take up that of a painter. His father finally somewhat reluctantly yielded, saying, "Do as you will, my boy, but at your own risk. You know I cannot help you." From herein he went about the community and procured many orders for portraits at 15 francs per head. With these aids, William Bouguereau was able at length to realize his long-cherished project, to go to Paris. He arrived there in March 1846, and at once entered the studio of Picot, that old master whose works and whose instruction carried the imprint of the most pre-eminent traditions, eating hardly anything but bread and cheese, and often going without any dinner. What did it matter to him? He had voluntarily taken to heart the adage, "Who paints, dines," and the only necessities of life for him were to paint, to draw, to study anatomy, natural history, and perspective. Ah, life is sweet. The groups of people, the peasants, and the energy of the city, all were to him texts for his artistic eye to learn by heart till they became the very maxims of his art. These maxims, the fruit of patient reflection and a clear mind, he consigned to a diary which he then began to write. From his point in our presentation, we want to focus primarily on how Bouguereau conducted his pictures from sketches to the final product, and how he thought out the evolution of the process to gain the greatest effect for composing his various themes. Although he is better known for his portrayals of youth and single figures and the occasional religious picture, he had to depict historical scenes which did not inspire him and which he executed with reserve. He did not care for history. He did not grasp it, and the laws of aesthetics and accuracy which had to be followed only caused him pain to have to pretend to know anything about it. Carroll Beckwith wrote of Bouguereau in The Cosmopolitan of 1890. It is perhaps in his treatment of form that Bouguereau finds his most intelligent admirers, as it is generally conceded to be his greatest excellence. It is obvious from his work that he has applied himself with unremitting devotion to the study of form in the human figure as exemplified by the grace of line and extreme charm of proportion. His treatment of the delicate loveliness of children is unrivalled. No detail is unworthy of his careful and intelligent attention, each accessory being as completely studied before its execution upon the final canvas as the most important figure. In the drawing of hands and feet, the observer is ever reminded of the masterly study that must have preceded such results. These words by Beckwith still hold true today. His popularity remains as a brilliant technician, one worthy of the artist's attention, and collectors have shown to continue to pay high prices for his canvases. In another commentary of his day we have the following. His range of subjects has embraced both Christian and pagan history, together with many flights of pure ideal fancy, and often a rendering of Italian or French peasant life, imbued with a decorative and poetic character, which strongly appealed to the painter. In this latter class of work it is often impossible to detect the reality or local colour of the spot or location chosen, owing to the effective sentiment brought to bear upon it. Few men have been able to maintain such a continuous, uninterrupted career of even, steady, and proficient production. Few poets or painters possess so patient a muse. The consistency and continuance of his style have been remarkable. We do not wish to imply that differences of merit in subject matter do not exist in his work, for indeed these differences have on several occasions been pronounced. In most all of his pictures there is the great beauty of drawing, above all in the extremities. The hands and feet are marvels of grace and proportion, while the movements of the figures and the unity of the compositions show a scholarly science and poetic discernment, in which possibly his only rival was his friend and schoolmate Cabanel. So now let's delve into the picture-making process as we know of it. First, the general procedure that seemed common enough in the French system was the idea of a general subject to be painted. Usually meant that one would begin studies, say, of some theme from the Bible and draw out on paper scribbles of a composition, followed by a more perfect rendering of the idea. Following that would be the employment of models to assist in the drawings transferable to the pose for figures involved. It may be that much more effort goes into shaping the composition in different directions, given an improvement in design. Once the format is satisfying, and the composition with figures works out well, usually on smaller formats, then it's time to draw more carefully the individual elements. In the case of Bouguereau's work, we see he painted many head studies as they are the most important area of the picture, following hands, clothing, or other accessories needed to be designed. All begins to take shape, so real effort begins on the final canvas. Bouguereau often placed a careful drawing which was transferred onto an oversized canvas, to be restretched at a later time once the unit was complete and a size decided upon. It should be noted that at times, even when he inked in a composition, he still may make drawing corrections, and that applies as well for finished paintings when necessary. His perfectionism and professionalism were always of paramount concern. A true workman in all respects. From the ideal that emanated from his mind, which nature had suggested to the artist, and the comparative insignificance of his actual models to portray, that is not to make a portrait of them explicitly, Bouguereau is indicated by a story which is characteristic. A visitor to his studio was surprised to see the romping about of a curly-headed cherub of a baby, while all about on the floor were sheets of exquisite drawings of the bambini. Laughing, the painter explained that the small rascal, dancing wildly about, was such a lively thing that he had had to go to the Louvre to get drawings for the picture for which the tot was supposed to be posing. I could only use him for the colour, he added. Even the colour, critics have remarked, however, is scarcely the colour that the sun and wind of Brittany's shores would produce. But his ideal was to him most important, and a job to get on with without delay. One can see from some of his drawings of specific models with contemporary clothing and fine characterization that he could be very accurate in his portrait work. The same exacting process is still evident. It is hoped that more of his portrait paintings will emerge over time. As we move into the major works Bouguereau has painted, of which he has no shortage of them, it has been said that he truly found his perfect process from the start. Can it be claimed of anyone of such unceasing enthusiasm for his art, of such continuous unending industry, as Bouguereau never failed to display? Picot, Bouguereau's first teacher in Paris, is undoubtedly partly responsible for this. Easily impressionable with energetic talent, the young painter adopted the theories and ideals of his teacher with all his heart and with all his imagination. From that time art to him meant one thing and one thing only, the expression of beauty as apprehended by the classicists. No later experiences ever changed either his ideal or his manner of interpreting it. Such probably fairly explains why the content of Bouguereau's paintings varied so little from decade to decade. That his technique equally was so unaltered is due to the ease with which, from a youth, he acquired his dexterous, meticulous, polished handling of brush and pigment. The method was so admirably adapted to his ideals that, naturally, the passage of years never tempted him to change it. Of some of the more iconic pictures by Bouguereau, we have Nymphs and Satyr, one of the finest canvases ever painted. It represents a mythological subject, and a challenge that perfectly suits his talents. One would be very hard-pressed to be able to even conjure up a similar theme and come close to this masterpiece now in the Clark Institute of Art in Williamstown, Massachusetts. His ability to render the satyr's imagined look as stunningly as anyone could render the mythical man. The female figures pulling the reluctant satyr is timeless in a classical posture which even the ancient Greeks would envy. Not to mention the carefully rendered atmosphere that correctly places the flat, well-articulated leaves and water, which is in keeping with the proper etiquette of traditional picture-making and completes the impression while still maintaining a real sense of being. It's an illusion that satisfies at every point, skillful draftsmanship and rich in technique. The Birth of Venus, by Bouguereau, from the d'Orsay Museum in Paris, is another example of immense skill. The main figure is classic in pose, and the surrounding figures of youth and male counterparts are superb examples of an ideal in an imagined scene. The details of each figure for the trained artist is a potpourri of technical knowledge. Few have ever come close to the depiction of youth, in particular the very small child, as Bouguereau has done. The linear design, the colour superb, and the composition satisfying at each part. From The Birth of Venus, we now turn to another wonderful picture, Return from the Harvest, a painting that was commissioned by a patron with the request that it have no nudes in it, but wanted it as an addition to his collection. The painting took some 4 years to fully complete, no doubt with many others waiting to be finished. However, by the time the painting was fully complete, the patron had already passed. It now hangs at the Cummer Museum of Art in Jacksonville, Florida. It is a painting that must be seen to be fully appreciated, as the large size dominates a wall where one can simply stand in awe. On the softer side of domestic picture-making, Bouguereau was able to carve out a fortune with vignettes that are wholesome, but still remarkable for originality, and the already established brilliant drawing and finish. He is always a standout in any gallery, as one might turn a corner and happen upon one of his works. For the artistic-minded individual, the charm of a well-refined, carefully wrought picture is rewarding and remains in the memory. Such is the power of images. Bouguereau has been called by his admirers preeminently the painter of flesh. Critics of more technical leanings do not agree with this enthusiasm, it should be said. He certainly produces in flesh painted surfaces so well finished that they seem waxed or enamelled to some. He makes figures of glazed earthenware by detractors. But knowledge, taste, and refinement are his constant qualities, and from these he derives a constantly serene elegance of manner. He was early imbued with the value of the classic line and the academic figure, and his skill in composition is always marked and satisfying. Many of his compositions are delightfully considered as pure arabesques. They are, in fact, poetry. In the sharply defined differences and the hot discussions of principles on art, one must consider the rampant jealousies around painters, and understandably in a competitive world, talent is sometimes feared, so we make no apologies for his great genius in this regard. Finally, we enjoyed doing this review on the work of Bouguereau, and we also appreciate you who have already subscribed. We look forward to presenting many more artists of great talent in the future. So remember to add a like, and we will see you next time. So bye for now.